And welcome to tonight's meeting of the Finance Review Group. Can I just remind members and officers to please remember to switch their microphones on when speaking directly in the microphone and switch off after you've finished. There's nobody joining us via Teams, but the meeting will be live streamed this evening to the public, and a recording from the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Any exempts, i.e. private items on the agenda, the live stream will cease prior to the meeting moving into the private, and then therefore might be a short delay in proceedings. Thank you. In the absence of the chair, we need to elect the chair for this meeting only. Could I have a nomination for chair, please? Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you. I have to say I do find other people's holidays terribly inconvenient. There you go. OK, move straight on. Thank you for all of the prologue, Matt. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Skeppelhorn and also the Chair, Councillor Young. Thank
you. Minutes, 14th of April and 17th of May. Can I sign those? Everybody happy? The silence indicates so. Disclosures of interest. You know the rules as well as I do. Nobody got anything to say?
None that I'm aware of, Chair.
Section 106. I guess the main item is subject to that. Yeah. No urgent business, I believe.
Again, none, Chair.
References, none. Chair's announcements. I suppose he's taken his bucket and spade and is having a nice time. Finance updates then, Dev.
Okay, Chair. Thanks very much and good evening, members. So the report you've got in front of you is the outturn report for the year, which is 31st of March 2022. And the same report is going to executive on the 4th of July. So we always, when the report is going to executive, if possible, we bring it to FRG even before going to executive. So that you've got in front of you members. I'll come back to the recommendation. There's a few there. But first, I would like to spend some time, take you through the report, because this is the final outturn, i.e. is the outturn for the Council for the 12 months ended 31st of March 2022, and it's subject to audit and subject to further finalization. So just a background to say it's subject to audit. And the other thing which I would mention here is paragraph 3. It has been another challenging year. So it's the second year of COVID. It was challenging because we were coming out of the pandemic. There's still ongoing demand pressures, pressures on income as well, and on several key services. And I will take you through those areas where you've got a sort of pressures. And there was also the delivery of savings program, which is continuing. And in order to keep the budget affordable and sustainable, with including the stabilization and recovery plan for the airport, it was a challenge. And there has been funding from central government as well, which I will take you through the report. The next paragraph I would like, Chair, is paragraph 4, which gives a little bit of, in the chart, you will see in Q3, we were forecasting a net underspend of $500,000, plus there was contingency which were not applied. But if you look at the underspend and contingency and the draft outturn, is roughly is not significantly out. There's a couple of million there. Then I will take you through the main reason, which is in paragraph 7. What is the, before we make any transfer to for unforeseen expenses, the departmental underspend, which is on top of the paragraph 7 on the top of the table, is more or less breaking even. So from a service point of view, it's more or less breaking even. There is a contingency which was left about 1.7 million, but then we had the upside, which was forecast in Q3 as well on borrowing costs. And I'll take you why there's an upside on the borrowing costs. So those are the two items in terms of the general contingency which is remaining and the borrowing costs, and both I will have to stress are one-off. So the level of interest, I will take you through why we had an upside on the borrowing, and you will see these are one-off. So how are you going to apply this 5 million? I will come back, and there are suggestions there, and that is in the recommendation. But then if I just quickly run through housing revenue account, and then I will go through with some detail in the general fund revenue outturn. So the HRA has got an operational surplus, which is around 3 million. But although we call it an operational surplus, this is going to be used as part of the capital program to build more properties. So the more we've got an element of surplus, then it goes towards subsidizing the building of social housing and make the building of social housing affordable. And that's how housing has got a program to build. And then we've got 1-for-1 receipts anyway. And those two contribute towards making the HRA program viable. In terms of the schools, it's still positive, a net underspend and contribution to reserves of 265 million in the year. And you have an explanation of those areas. One of the areas where a lot of council are really struggling is the SEN. So that's where other council, in Luton we have to keep an eye, but we are okay so far. But other council has got a big gap in their SEN budget. SEN is a special educational need. Now the paragraph 10 gives you a breakdown of the outturn per department, and you will see it's a bit on the fourth column. You will see in chief exec, inclusive economy, there is a downside, but there's an upside in children and population and well-being. And that shows a little bit that there has been significant investment in the frontline service like social care, and government keeps providing more COVID funding, and some came very late in January, February, and there was additional funding from housing, which is welcome, but those were one-off, and it came very late in the year. So that's why some of the areas has got an upside, and some savings were delivered in advance of what was over the 2 years, some were delivered earlier. So that's brought an upside on those. But you will see in draft service 2.8, 2.3 million are carried forward. So the net bottom line from a net cost service point of view, without taking corporate in terms of contingency and corporate like bank interest and investment income, is more or less breaking even. So you've got public health as well. You've got an upside of 239, but those are not significant, but those goes in a reserve, and public fund and schools and HRA, they're separate fund. So they get used, it's not mixed with the general fund. The next table, which is 11, is interesting, and that gives you quite a detailed breakdown where we are in terms of the outturn. But what we also, especially we've got inflation, which is one of the biggest risks, and the budget pressures because of the slowing down of the economy, because COVID money is not being sort of, there won't be any more COVID money. So we wanted to give you an early indication what that impact will have on 22-23 budget. So at least we can start to plan early. And as you know, when we had the finance settlement, the prediction for Office of Budget Responsibility was around 2.5 inflation, but now inflation is running at 9. So everybody will have to go back and revisit the budget which was approved, and having a high level of inflation, the cost of living, Ukraine war, we have to go back and revisit all our assumptions. So that make this year even more challenging, I would say. So I will just pick up 2 or 3 key areas where we've got overspend. One is in children's services, and that is explained on the, you will see just on the chief exec. And the focus is for this 22-23 is 2.7. This is something which, as officers, we are having a meeting and we are going to be discussing as part of the normal monitoring budget preparation, because we're already working on 23-24 budget. So that will have to look at how we're going to contain those budget pressures. It's a challenge, but we'll have to see, because we are sort of legally, we have to produce a balanced budget. Homelessness. So you will see homelessness, although there is a sort of upside in homelessness, but that basically because there was one-off additional grant which we received late into the system. But going forward, there is going to be, right now, based on early estimate, there is an overspend of 1.5 forecast. And there is a special transport. So transport is an area we have been struggling, but there is a lot of effort being put. There is a paper which was discussed even today at CLT, how we are going to address that level of overspend and look at other areas or the options, how we are going to address and try to contain the spend within budget. And those are the 3 main areas which I wanted to go through, but I'm quite happy to go through any additional sort of area where you would like to go through. Then the next line it talks about inflation. And this is one of the biggest challenge which is being faced by not only local government, by central government, by private sector as well. And if you look at this on paragraph 12, if you look at the table there, just an initial estimate is 2.7 to 7.3. That's the range of inflationary pressures we're expecting, and that's just price inflation. I will talk about pay inflation, pay award. So if you take a mid case around 5-6 million, these are the pressures which all council will have to face. And we'll have to look at how we are going to manage that budget pressure. Then still ongoing demand in core services, as I've mentioned earlier, and still we have to deliver 5.4 million of budget savings. So it's a challenging environment. So that's we are trying to bring early figures and give an early indication what looks like for 22-23, because when we are going to make 22-23 more sustainable, then will give us a sustainable base for 23-24 as well. So it's all linked. So you've got 3 years which you're talking here. And then the next bullet point you will see below the, I think on my page is 9.8. I think in your annex is 9/8. But just below that, we're talking about inflation. So we made an allowance of pay award in the budget 22-23 about 2.25. But right now we know inflation is running at roughly 8 or 9 or even higher. So that is going to have an impact on the budget. We don't know how much is going to be the pay award, which is going to be settled with unions. But right now is a 1% increase in pay equates to 1.1 million. So these are the things which was not forecast at the time of budget preparation. Even the OBR, the finance settlement, the chancellor, there was no expectation that inflation will be running that high. The paragraph 13 gives you some detail on what was the cumulative impact on the outturn at Q3 and the final outturn. Then if I take you paragraph 15, that talks about the savings program. And over the last 3 years, we started with a savings program of 38 million and 28 million has now been secured. But I think delivering a 38 million of savings program is challenging. So you are getting into that last 10 million, and that's we have to make sure we deliver. But the more you deliver savings, the more it becomes difficult to deliver. So, but we're on target, and that shows that we've delivered 28 million, which is a significant amount of savings which has been delivered, despite all the budget pressures, despite all the pressures on demand as well. Paragraph 16 talks about contingency, and that's one of the area where at the beginning of the year, we have what we call a general contingency. That's in order to look at unforeseen circumstances or increases in cost. And at the end of the year, this is always in discussion and agreement with the leader and the chief exec, we try to allocate. So these are the 3 areas where we are ring fencing that 2.3 million of contingency. And first is additional external audit fees. And that's due to the complexity of the finance, the impact of the pandemic. We had to go through, and there has been several discussions with auditors. There was meeting here, FRG. So because of the complexity, because of the work, because of this recovery plan, auditors had to spend a lot of time. So that's not just for 1 year, it's over the 2-3 years. So we are setting aside a sum of money, but that will be with further discussion with auditors. And we have to make sure we do go through the detail how this additional costs will be explained, and we do go through PSSA. They are here to arbitrate if there is any further challenge from the council. There is a 1.2 million, which is discounted settlement of contractual costs of street lighting equipment. A report is coming to the executive, I think in the 3rd week of July. Yeah. So that will give you a much more sort of detailed explanation about this cost. But we are setting aside 1.2 million towards that cost. And then members are aware there's a sort of planning inquiry for Luton Airport expansion, and that will cost in the region of 600,000. Now, these are early estimates. So because these are pressures which are now, all these pressures are things which is happening now, we've set aside 2.3 million. That will help us to ease the pressure in 22-23, but quite rightly, the upside has helped, and the upside from the less borrowing cost has helped us to give us some more firing power going in 22-23. In terms of corporate budget, which is paragraph 17, And you will see an upside of sort of 4 million. And that's mainly because there's reduced capital spend. So you will see when I'll take you through the capital monitoring, there are some projects which have been reprofiled, and this reason has been explained there. And there has been less drawdown of borrowing from the Foxhole and Lal. So these projects have been reprofiled, and as a result, when there's less borrowing, then there's less borrowing cost. And on top of that, we try to use our cash flow, because in 21-22, government gave us money a bit upfront to help with the cash flow. Those COVID money, those money for business rate relief. So we had a significant amount of money which government to release the cash flow pressure on council, give us upfront rather than over 12 months. And that helped us to reduce our borrowing, but now those borrowing is back to the level this year. So that, again, as I said, is a one-off. Then in terms of corporate level grants, that's important. Paragraph 18 explained the first bullet point, how much grant we receive from coronavirus, new homes bonus, and on top of that, you'll have business rate discount compensation. That's where we get money from central government to help businesses in terms of business rate relief and other compensation. So there has been some significant money in order to stabilize the UK economy, stabilize local government finance. But in 22-23, all those COVID money is gone now. Council will have to fund any shortfall in fees and charges like parking. We've got to find that, and you will see there is some money set aside from the COVID as well when you come back to the recommendation to carry forward in 22-23, around 2.5 million, and those are one-off as well. In terms of reserves, so our reserves are there or thereabout as planned, but you will see is in the bottom line, you will see additional Section 31 grant of 8.5 million. And that is just in the table, just before the last line. But that is basically government giving us money for initiatives which government has brought about. So when government says they would like to increase the retail relief for businesses, then there's a shortfall of the business rate which we as a council will receive, because it's a government initiative, they compensate us for that loss, and that's what we call Section 31 grant. There's government initiatives, but yeah. So when government brings some initiatives, what happened in the year we set the business rate, we don't get the money. So the collection fund is an account where we put the money that goes into deficit. And normally the deficit doesn't get reported this year, but get reported the following year. But because government has already provided the money this year, we have to set it aside to meet the collection deficit. It's a bit technical, but I'm saying is there's a time lag between getting us the money from central government and declaring that deficit from business rate in our account. But this is not new money. This is money. It's not an additional fund. So, and that's we made it clear to Deluxe as well, all chief finance officers. When you look at our balance sheet, it looks like we are putting 8.5 million in reserves, but in reality, it's not putting money in reserves. It's just carrying forward that fund received to meet the collection and deficit, because there's always a time lag in reporting the collection fund deficit. So that's why I've split it. What is before Section 31 grant and after Section 31 grant. And then going further, the coronavirus grant, this was grant which we received from central government, and that's grant we have practically spent. There's 2.5 million, which I will come back to the recommendation, because the impact of coronavirus is ongoing. So parking, fees and charges, income from other like renting, community centers, those before it reached the pre-pandemic level, it might take some time. So 2.5 million we're setting aside in order to make sure 22-23 we can take care of some of these budget pressures. Capital outturn, as I've mentioned earlier, so we'll see paragraph 23, there is 65 million of projects which have been rephased to future years, but there are some projects which we have spent before, like 22-23 projects were spent in 21-22. So we brought forward those spent in order to match the level of spend in 21-22. The table gives you a breakdown, but you will see in corporate projects, that's where original budget 55, the budget slippage is 85, so the outturn is 65. So there's incorporate project 17 million, which is the net figure. I think paragraph 26 to below gives you a detailed account of the areas where the spend has been sort of reprofiled or there has been spend brought forward. So it gives you a detailed breakdown of the project. So you've got parks, you've got in property, you've got areas in waste, transport. And transport, there is a 2.9, and that's mainly because some of the delivery of the vehicles order were placed now. So those vehicles will be procured, but there's a lead times of 12 months. So it's 2.9 million. And then you've got ICT and transformation, that's 2.7. So those are big item, and those ICT and projects will be delivered in 22-23 and 23-24. Children's services as well, that's schools. The net budget is a 10.9, but children, there's an underspend of 563, so there's not because of liquid lodging. Population well-being as well, there are some areas, but the bulk you will see in inclusive, because that's where you've got highways, you've got IT, you've got quite a lot of major projects, which mainly is inclusive economy. The corporate capital projects, that's where I've explained, is in terms of LAL and Foxhole Home. Most of this is because some of the projects are going to be delivered, not completed in 21-22, but some of them in 22-23. HRA capital program, there's a slippage of 10.3, but I know we have been discussing there's a sort of project which we start to rebuild around 75 properties in order to make sure HRA has got those properties which are being sold and the right to buy are being replaced. The funding sources is mainly breaks down in that paragraph. You will see 44, how our capital expenditure is funded. And you will see the corporate project borrowing 65 million, that mainly is external borrowing. So you've got general fund borrowing requirement, corporate. Why we split that? Because the corporate is mainly Foxhole Home, LAL. So when we lend those corporate projects, we get interest on those. While general fund, we don't get interest. So if you're buying, let's say, vehicle, it will be general fund borrowing, but the vehicle, the way it's funded, because we're raising council tax to collect bins. So we have to fund those vehicles. But as corporate, it's a corporate decision to invest, and the debentures, we get interest on that. So that's why you will see why you've got two level of borrowing. And then bring to the key risks. I think the risk is, I think every time I do go for the risk, but one of the things which is managing the ongoing impact of coronavirus, because coronavirus still will have an impact. And then the other thing is implementation of care reform. This is something which will have an impact on the council, and it will have financial impact because overall the view of local government and LGA, that's the whole care reform, it's not properly funded. So when we are going to implement in the next sort of 6 to 18 months, the implementation has already started because we have discussed it even this morning. So that will have to assess, that may have an impact on the budget going forward. And then if I may, Chair, bring to the recommendations now, which is going to be presented to the executive, is first is we've got an upside, but part of this is the COVID 2.5 million. So this is not, the council is central government money, and the amount which is not spent in 21-22 will be spent in 22-23. And other 2.5, which is an upside from the corporate interest budget, we are carrying forward to meet one of inflationary pressures in 22-23. And that's one of the main one we know is electricity energy costs. Yeah, so there's a breakdown there. And then there's general contingency, which is being utilized. And I went through how this general contingency is being allocated. Then you got the normal carry forward, which is money is received, but commitment is for following year. And then I think F says we have to take into account the underlying cost pressures. And that is, yeah, it is going to be another difficult year in terms of how we're going to balance the budget. And then whether there will be support coming from central government, we don't know yet. So, but the cost pressures is already building. We are getting stuff requests from the supplier market, from transport, to say, okay, here's the budget pressure because of the fuel prices and other costs is going up. So how are you going to balance that this year, and how this will have an impact on 2023? Officers are working on those. But it's a challenge for the whole system, not local government, but every department, every private sector, everybody, the personal budget as well is paying utility bills, and everything is not easy. So And then the last one is about the position for HRA Public Health and Schools budget. So thanks very much, Chair. I rather took some time to take you through because this is a final outturn for this year. And then we're already working on the Q1 for 22-23. So it's never, it just keeps on going round and round.
Thank you for that, Dev. OK, questions, comments, anybody? Yes, Councillor Hussain.
Can I ask you, in terms of the overspend on the send transport, there was a paper some time ago where they were looking at restructuring the transport and looking at some of the other local authorities on the send transport so that we could, because nationally there is a huge gap what government funds and what the send expenditure is.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As I said, this morning there was a detailed paper being discussed at corporate leadership team and looking at all options and looking at how we can make the budget more sustainable. So the point you made absolutely right. We have to look at all the options. We have to look at where the pressures is coming from, and the pressures will be with the increase in fuel prices will be even more. That's why you will see there's a forecast of 1.6. So we have to look at how we are going to meet the demand and how we are going to look at what is affordable as well. So that's a challenge which officers, members are faced is on one hand, you've got budget pressures, but on the other hand, you've got the resources which are limited or which are sort of not only every year there's a cap in the budget. So you have to look at all the options. You're absolutely right, Councillor. Yeah.
Is in terms of the increase in special needs is about 40% in Luton, which is rather exceptional to other local authorities. Now, are we, sort of in terms of the new new children coming into it, is that now, sort of covered in the budget, or did I miss it somewhere?
I think in the budget we made some provision, but what we have to do now is that's what was discussed this morning, is to look at a bit like a zero-based budget. So look at, okay, what is the base? Where the pressures are coming? Okay, is it pressures because of the volume in terms of, as you quite rightly said, is it the new demand coming? But the things which we know is some of the complexity of those cases. So some of them, its cases are becoming more complex. They might need transport. And then there's an element of cost as well. Okay, are we providing the facility in a most efficient and effective way? It has to make sure it meets the needs of the child, but at the same time, we have to make sure is it quite efficient the way we are procuring, the way we are buying, because there's various ways of providing transport. So all these things will be explored and to see, okay, what that budget looks like, because over the last 2-3 years, there have been an overspend in that budget. So we're doing a very comprehensive piece of work in terms of the send transport. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Anybody else? Yep, David.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm new to this committee, so bear with me if I find some of it a bit trickier than it might be. I'll get used to it. Right. The costs of children's services, which it's already showing has been a significant problem this year. I'm told that at the children's meeting yesterday, there was an external central government advisor on children's services addressing that meeting last night. And he was proposing all sorts of actions that we needed to take as a council. But the people from children's services reported to the meeting yesterday that there was no money. Are we taking into account the fact that we're going to have more pressure on children's services in the year going forward than we've had now, and we've already had an overspend?
Mike, that's a very good question. I think children's services is one of the services where we are experiencing pressures. So we are pressures in social care with the care reform in housing. Over the years, there has been significant investment in children's services. I think it might come in the region of 8, 9, or even 10 million. There has been an investment, significant investment in children's services. And just to make sure that as part of the Ofsted, we come out of this and become a good service. So there has been significant investment. And that shows the council commitment is to take the children's services very seriously. And there has been, if you see every meeting, every full council, you will see over the last 3 years that significant investment has gone through. If there are any actions which we have to take, not just for children's services, but all statutory services like social care and housing, even potholes, highways, every area, they are stop pressures. And due to demographic changes as well, aging population. And that is the challenge which we have as officers and members to make sure how we can redirect resources where the priority lies. In terms of whether there's no money, I think we know the whole local government system is underfunded. So that's a reality. That's in terms of Luton, if you look at our finance settlement over the years, and we know that because the way the formula funding works, which government hopefully will start to look at in the future ways of fair funding review, but there is an underfunding of roughly 12 million. When we compare with our statistical neighbors, the funding, the core spending per head of population, we've got a shortfall of 12 million. So we have to look at ways how we are going to balance the budget. And that's where there's discussion, consultation, and there's detailed consultation when we are looking at services where you have statutory consultation and engagement. So we do that as well. But it's a challenge. I'm not going to say, okay, we've got a pot of money where we can just, it is a challenge how we can deliver the services, meet the needs of the resident, make sure we deliver the statutory services, and at the same time, there's a legal requirement to have a balanced budget. So we've invested in children's services significant, and if they are critical thing which needs to be done, I'm sure the council will meet those statutory requirements.
Yes, if I can just follow that up. The perception is that we are always cutting back on children's services, not investing in them. And the other thing that became apparent to me talking to members of that committee from yesterday was that we're getting pressurised by central government to do more, but I haven't seen any real evidence as yet, the fact that we're actually budgeting to do what we're being asked to do. And that's the difficulty. If I see a central government advisor coming in and telling one of our committees that this is the way that things should be done and these are the extra services we need to provide, and then I don't see anything in the budget to back it up, then I get worried, because that's still going to be perceived as another failure. And I regret to say, I think that the perception of our performance on children's services, the perception is that it's been a failure.
I think in terms of the funding, I will just refer to what I've said. The whole system is underfunded, and government has got a difficult job because of COVID. Government has borrowed, but the whole funding system of local government will have to look at. And this has been something which local government and everybody has been saying is the way the funding works. And government has promised that as part of fair funding review, they will look at how local government is funded more sustainable. But we get some additional one-off funding and say, okay, that will help for the 2 years, put some precept, adult social care precept. But I think the long-term funding of local government will have to be looked at carefully by central government. And then you're absolutely right. If there's more requirement like care reform is a big, the fair cost of care and the care cap, that will have a big impact. That's the biggest reform over the last 20 or 30 years in social care. So you're absolutely right. These initiatives and the expectation has to be properly funded. Otherwise, council will struggle. In terms of coming back to children, I wouldn't go as far as saying there has been cutting back in children's services because over the last 3-4 years, I have been preparing the budget. There has been significant investment in children's services. But one of the things is, on one hand, we have to fund the service properly, and if there are demographic changes and statutory requirement growth, we have been. If you look at last year's budget, I think the total growth from the council was in the region of probably 15 million. But on the other hand, we have to look at areas where we can make efficiency savings. So if you got the high level of let's say, agency staff, then you have to say how we can reduce that cost. I won't call that cut back. If you've got more children in agency foster carers, so we have to say, can we move that, because that's expensive. So it's a quite fine balance. On one hand, we have to make sure the service is properly funded in terms of statutory services and what is required, but on the other hand, to make sure, are we really delivering sort of an efficient and effective service? And agencies is one of them. Transport, when we talk about transport, there's various ways of providing a transport. That does not necessarily mean if we provide sort of a taxi or something like that, and that's an expensive, but if you've got share minibus or whatever, that's another way of providing transport. So how we do that when the finances of local government and the council is stretched, how do we do that? It's a balancing. But I would say there is cut back in children's services. We have invested heavily in children's services. And that shows when you look at the CIPFA Resilience Index, it shows the amount of investment which is going in children's services as a percentage of the council net budget requirement has gone high. So every year we have been investing in children's services. And that reflects the council priorities. Children's services is quite very important.
Can I just make a request for me, if not for the other more experienced members of this group? Can we make sure that when we get financial reports going forward now, that we actually can see clearly what the investment trend is in children's services, because it is not being looked on well by our community? Continue, yes, Chair, or you? Okay, thank you. You mentioned at one stage something that I found quite surprising. Did I mishear? You were saying that some of the surpluses in one area would make social housing more affordable. Does this mean we're actually going to go back to having some social housing rather than affordable housing?
Okay, so I was referring to the HRA. So HRA is social. Yeah. What I've said is there was roughly 3 million of surplus in HRA. So the housing revenue account, that's where we've got social housing. Yeah. Yes. So the bit which I said affordable, I say it's make the project viable. So viability, when we are building those houses, rather than borrowing, if you can use part of the surplus and part of the one-for-one receipts, then means that the level of borrowing it's lower, and it makes it viable. And that's why housing association, some of the housing association look at the viability, and the price of land is high, then they decide to sometimes not to proceed with those projects. So that's what I said. The surplus in the HRA goes toward the capital program, and the surplus will be part of the capital cost, then make the projects viable.
Thank you. It would seem that I did misinterpret, because I thought you were talking about social housing, which is what I think we need, not the affordable housing. Okay. Now, from my ward's point of view, I'm beginning to be concerned, and I don't know how this will reflect on the budget, but I'm beginning to be concerned. My ward has been the first one to have had the new fibre optic cabling inflicted on it. I believe that will drastically increase the need for additional budget for highways, because they're making an awful mess, and they're going to go on from my ward to the wards of all the other councillors here in this group. And I think that we're going to have additional highways cost.
This is something I will take it back. Yeah, I think it's more for.
They have a duty to reinstate to a quality standard already agreed. If they're not doing so, I will take it up with them. But there'll be no additional highway costs.
That doesn't appear to be the position, Roger. The reply I've had from highways suggests that highways are going to just do patching and stuff, and to make it reasonable, it's going to want more than that.
David, I'll arrange to come up and have a look with you. I'll arrange to come up and have a look with you.
Our staff costs going forwards, it appears increasingly likely that we're going to end up with significantly increased staff costs one way or another. I sort of get a feeling that says it could well be 7% or more in terms of salary costs over the next year. How much are we taking that into account?
I think I've mentioned earlier, when we prepared the budget, that was based on the finance settlement and the forecast from OBR. Since then, you're absolutely right. Inflation has gone up, and then you will see there's a strike, and there's things are not the same as when we prepared the budget. We made an allowance of 2.25 in the budget. Right now, we don't know what that the negotiation will come. In fact, I'm attending a meeting tomorrow. There will be discussion and there will be settlement agreed between local government and the unions. And right now, I can't say what that figure looks like. And in 23-24 as well, there is an allowance of 2% in the budget. As I've said in the report, a 1% increase costs 1.1 million. And what that figure looks like, we have to work on various scenarios to say. So the pay inflation and the price inflation will have an impact in every council, and we'll have just to see how we are going to address those budget pressures. And that is a challenge which officers will have to face and will have to come to members. But I see that was the best assumption at that time, and it turns out to be inflation are running much higher.
Anybody else? I beg your pardon?
Chair, but I'll make that, if anybody else has got any questions, it's just a comment here.
Well, the informal way in which we generally operate this, I don't see the need to separate comments from questions. I've got a couple of points I want to raise, but it seems nobody else has. So do you want to go now? Yeah,
just in terms of what's been said in terms of the investment in children's services. I mean, in terms of the shortfall nationally is about 1.2 or 1.4 billion pounds, which is supposed to be funded to the children, and the LGA has been asking for that for a number of years, and the gap is getting bigger and bigger, particularly in the social care as well as the special needs. So we are nowhere near what the government ought to be funding the children's services to what really is being given. Yet, and Councillor Wynne is right, you're asked more to do statutory services, but there is no funding coming with it. So local authorities are given more duties as such, but nothing comes with it, just a duty. And you have to do it because they are statutory services. Have I got that right?
Yeah, Councillor, you're absolutely right. is, as I said, I started to say the whole local government is underfunded, and it's getting bigger, the gap, and that's the challenge. And there will be sort of, statutory services will have to provide that level of service. You're absolutely right. And that's a challenge the whole local government is facing, and especially with inflation, which, as I said, in this, just the price is in the region of 6 million, 6 million, but you pay over 2 years. If 1% is 1.1, and if the settlement is more than that, it's just create a big gap. It's not, it's keep me awake at night. Yes. Yeah. The section 151, yes, it does. Yeah.
Particularly in terms of the fuel cost, there are certain people in the services, and particularly in children's services and the adult services, have to travel to their clients. And, you know, the cost per mile is now exceptionally high. You know, a 50-mile journey around the town could cost you £10, which it didn't before. It was not even half that. Yeah.
No, I share your concern, Councillor.
Okay, I've just got a few points. I won't take much of your time. The middle of paragraph 8 tells us that one of the reasons for the overspend on the housing revenue account was higher capital charges for the year, but the figures on paragraph 25 are telling us that the capital spending on the housing revenue account did go up by about £3 million, but not by as much as 13 odd million that was expected. So I guess we should assume that if that reduction in capital spending in housing revenue account hadn't taken place, then overspend would have been bigger. But bearing in mind the ring fencing of housing revenue account, and our housing revenue account is in a fairly healthy state, I guess it would have been able to cope with that.
Yes, your questions are always very challenging and technical. So you're absolutely right. If that's HRA would have made provision to cope with that. But one other thing, I will go back to check the detailed numbers. But sometimes the capital charges works a bit 1 year in arrears. So last year spent, once the budget has been set, then you compute the actual capital charges and get reflected in the following year, and the impact of this year will have next year. But you're absolutely right. The HRA is sustainable, so any impact would have been taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at the chart that starts paragraph 11, starts on page 9/7 and goes over the page. The thing that concerns me most, I guess, is the right-hand column of this chart, which is giving the impact on the, bearing in mind we're looking at last year's accounts, and this is giving us the effect on the current year's budget, where before inflation there's likely to be a 6.8, 6.9 million pound impact on the current year's budget. And given that's going to carry on plus inflation for the 23-24 budget, subject to any corrective action that might be possible during the current year. And I understand that you are looking for 5.4 million budget savings, it says in the next paragraph. But it is a concern, obviously, that this is a continuing problem, which just gets bigger and bigger every year. And as the squeeze from the government gets tighter and tighter every year, the problem just becomes more and more difficult to solve. So no, I'm not asking you for a magic solution. I'm just pointing out that it is a continuing and rather worrying problem, which I'm pretty sure Rob is looking forward to grappling with. Moving on, paragraph 17, just a clarification here, please, to make sure. I've always, this is a reference to use of internal cash balances in lieu of borrowing. Obviously, a very sensible thing to do. Why go and borrow from the bank when you've got cash sitting there that you could use instead? I've always worked on the assumption that a capital project that's using what I call internal borrowing actually paid interest on that internal borrowing. So the balance is increasing. I'm guessing that the interest they pay is rather less than it would be if it was money borrowed from elsewhere. But the interest is charged to the project, isn't it?
Yeah, let me try to explain it a little bit. Yeah, so you're right. The interest is paid on the project. So let's say when we have a project, let's say, I don't know, building home or whatever. As part of that viability, we put an interest element. You're absolutely right. So that makes the project viable. So when we prepare the capital program, you're absolutely right to say, here's the interest which that capital program will have to. At that point, it might be, I don't know, 2% or 2.5 or 3%. And that's built in the cost of the capital program. Then in the budget, you're absolutely right. The revenue budget will say, oh, we are going to pay £1 million in interest. But what happened during the year, let's say we spend £10 million on the capital program, but then, as I've explained, last year, government gave us a lot of COVID money at the beginning of the year. So sometimes you get business rates over 10 months, but government, some of this, knowing that council are facing cash flow problem, they gave quite a lot of money at the beginning of the year. And then there was other projects in terms of where some of the capital projects were reprofiled for following years. So that gave us a big pot of money where cash flow wise, the money was required not in year, but the following year. So that's where, rather than going and borrowing at long term for PWLP, which would have been 2.5, we said you've got some cash this year, and government has provided some cash in terms of some of the business rate section 31 grant was significant, but that will be utilized next year. In the meantime, we use that cash not to borrow to fund that capital project. So the point you made absolutely, and that's where you've come the upside, is yes, we've made an allowance for the project and we built that the interest we are going to pay, but rather than go borrowing long term, that year cash flow we try to manage. And at that point, I have to say, Councillor, is the first 6-7 months, the interest rate was still, but then we start to see the interest rate start to climb. That's why in the months 8-9, we've went and locked quite a lot of our fixed term borrowing. So right now we don't have any short term variable. We've locked everything. So that window of opportunity we had in terms of managing our cash flow, we were borrowing at 0.25, 0.3 rather than 2 or 2.5%. So that's what one of. So the point you said, yeah, the capital program absolutely has got that interest built in, but we went borrowed on the short term, the interest rate was lower.
Thank you. Anybody else before we move on to the next item? No? Okay, I guess I should move, first of all, that we note the report, and secondly, that we thank Dev and his finance team for a very comprehensive explanation of where the council is. Everybody happy with that? Okay, work programme.
Thank you, Chair. Members have before them the current work programme finance review group for 2022 to 23. The next meeting is quite a busy meeting in August because we've had a couple of items from today pushed back to then. You should also have before you the current forward plan. So if there's any items on there that members believe that we should bring to one of our meetings, then now's your opportunity to bring that up.
Okay, anybody got anything to say about the work programme? The only thing that I've got then is a question. Do we yet have any idea when we are going to see the outcome of the investigation into the SEMLEP missing 1.1 million?
I will refer to Dev for that.
Okay. We've got the final report, and this is currently being discussed. And as I've said, Councillor Frank, is a discussion which takes place between SEMLEP and ourselves. And we received not about a week ago, probably. So that discussion is taking place between SEMLEP and ours with Robina as well. And yes, there will be a comprehensive report coming once you agree with SEMLEP and obviously with BISA as well. Then yes, there will be a comprehensive report coming to FRG just to explain more detail, which so far, because of the advice from legal, we couldn't go into much detail because that investigation was ongoing. That investigation has not been completed because it's an ongoing investigation, but we've reached a point where Natis, who has been leading on that investigation, has come to a point to say it's substantially complete, and they will be able to they've shared a very comprehensive report, and then their advice as well and advice we receive, we can have a much more detailed discussion and debate of what happened and share some of the elements of that report. So a report will be coming to FRG soon.
And thank you for that, Dev. I mean, we don't want a half-baked report. We don't want something before the conclusion, but we do, I believe, need to have a full report of the investigation and its outcome, and whatever solution is finally agreed between SEMLEP and the council. Okay, look forward to a date as soon as you've got one. Thank you, Matt. I guess we're now moving on to the private part of the agenda.